The seeds of the year-long seminar experience that some of your sibling congregants participated in were laying in that pandemic time period, the height of it, during which we were observing that the institutions of government were not necessarily working for everybody in the same way, that the institutions of healthcare were not necessarily working for everybody in the same way, for the common interest of all. In that time of acute awareness of the shortcomings of the public systems around us that care for the common good, we began getting in our question box services. That's when I would pick out of a box questions submitted by congregants. Curious and earnest questions from you all as a community. Questions reflecting on the state of our civil societies, on the reality of climate change. Questions along the lines of, should me and my family be preparing for civil disturbance or even civil war in the United States? Or other questions like, we humans are not adequately responding to the needs of climate change and the impacts are escalating. What should I do with my fear and my anxiety? Or questions along the lines of, our political system has stopped working for ordinary people. I feel grief that this is the world my grandkids will inherit. What's possible? How can I help make things better? In the midst of my recognition that increasing numbers of us in community were holding questions like these, Vilma Mesa, one of our participants in today's service, was our auction sermon winner in 2023, and we entered into a deep process of collaboration and conversation, elements of which I'm going to share with you with Vilma's permission. She presented to me the work of the French economist Thomas Piketty, who his main thesis is that unbridled, unbalanced, unchecked capitalism in combination with spiraling economic inequality that political systems are allowing to happen are the root cause of much of what is going on. It is I would say it's a root cause, but Piketty says even it is the root cause. And as Vilma and I were in discussion around this, a very heartfelt and earnest exchange happened. Vilma looked at me with deep sincerity and said, I have wondered, does anything that I've worked on and accomplished matter? With the direction humanity is headed in, I don't know. This was a poignant moment for me. I was already holding the questions like this that were organically coming up in our community. And then through that exchange with Vilma, the steps forward began to solidify. The birth of a year-long learning and growing opportunity. Looking at specific questions such as, where are we as a human species? What's possible in the climate and circumstances we're living in? Who can we, who should we choose to be? If you join me in welcoming Paul Morris into our pulpit.
Good morning. The course consisted of only 9 sessions, but it spanned enough time to allow a deeper immersion into the content. We explored 3 fundamental questions. Where are we now in the present? How did we get here in the past? And who do we choose to be in the future? We began by looking at humanity's present circumstances, and it was a unique period of time in both the larger world and my personal life. We studied the rise of authoritarianism worldwide and in our own nation. We looked at complex ongoing conflicts like those underway in Ukraine and Gaza. The U.S. had its presidential election, and I was laid off from my job. There were moments where lines of reality blurred for a while, and the uncertainty in the world around me and the uncertainty in my own life intersected. In the seminar, we examined both fictional representations of the time we're in, as well as historical and recent events. Some of the fiction we examined is best described as dystopian. Many of the current events and threats we identified were all too familiar, but examining the full range of issues we faced was sobering and, to be honest, occasionally depressing. We face many pressing challenges: environmental, political, economic, cultural. They're often interrelated and compound problems in other areas of life that may seem unrelated. Some have said we're in a polycrisis. Others have suggested we need to address these complexities with multi-solving, looking for solutions that intentionally work together in a synergistic manner. Whatever we choose to do, we must recognize that what's worked in the past is not likely to achieve the same results as we move forward. We need to be open to new options and new possibilities. There were 2 core books used in the course, one by Vanessa Macchiato de Oliveira, Hospicing Modernity, and one by Margaret Wheatley, Who Do We Choose to Be? Both of these incorporated perspectives from indigenous cultures. A key point for me was being reminded of the differences between viewing time as linear versus time as cyclical. We can move beyond a simple start, middle, end concept of time and think about time as reflected in the cycles of seasons and generations and civilizations. These cycles of life point towards birth, death, and regeneration and the possibility of new life. This helps me remember that the end of a life cycle includes a decomposing process that is necessary for new life to emerge. Thich Nhat Hanh said, "No mud, no lotus." The messy stuff enables new beauty to emerge. Maybe part of being human at this moment in time includes helping to compost the inventions, assumptions, and ways of thinking and being that have reached the end of their life, to release new energy that can then be used by new growth trying to emerge.
Understanding what needs composting includes a process of reflecting on those assumptions and behavior patterns that we human beings have gotten wrong or aren't working. Included among these is the sense of superiority, even supremacy, that separates us not only from other living beings, but also the environment of which we are a part and from one another. We humans have mastered the unjustifiable hypothesis that some of us are inherently more worthy than some others. Would you welcome into the pulpit Vilma Mesa?
One of our core texts in the seminar was Vanessa Machado de Oliveira's book, Hospicing Modernity. In that book, de Oliveira shares a poem called Brutal Kindness. This poem expresses the frustration of being different in a country that is not yours. It challenges the notion of a melting pot and alludes to the expectation that visitors, migrants, immigrants conform and exhibit cultures that only exist in the host country's exotic imagination. The first stanza of Brutal Kindness reads, "We welcome you to our nation. Our borders are only open to a few. We ask for nothing in return except that you recognize the deepest wisdom that when in Rome, you do as the Romans do." Later, after the speaker insists on the goodness and kindness of the hospitality that is offered to immigrants, the poem continues. "Therefore, you must know your place, do as you're told, strive for your best, work twice as hard, feel indebted, show good manners, be clean and organized, get an education, dress appropriately, smell nice, Pair your duties, lay low, be happy, focus on positive things, use language that we can understand, entertain us with your culture when requested, and jump off the balcony if required. Next, after highlighting the incredible opportunities afforded to newcomers, the poem goes on and admonishing those newcomers by saying, under no circumstances should you break our trust, complain, or communicate disapproval, expose our inadequacies, reveal our contradictions, disclose our insecurities, challenge our authority, make up accusations, fuel dissent, defy our right to distinguish our heroes, remind us of what we chose to deny, speak of the past we want to forget, outperform, outsmart, outshine us, or bite the hands that feed you. The poem ends with a reminder that there will be unimaginable consequences if the newcomer being spoken to in the poem is ungrateful or does not conform to the outlined expectations. This was a hard poem to read, and no doubt for you to also hear. And from what I gather in our seminar discussion, the content of this poem was also really difficult to talk about. And I see notes from my siblings in the seminar. Even though the poem was published in 2012 in a newspaper in Finland, speaking specifically about the experiences of Black and Arab immigrants to a largely homogeneous nation, I resonated deeply with it. I resonated with both the voice of the speaker and with the experience of the newcomer being addressed. More than once, I have asked my foreign students to work harder, women to be careful when voicing their opinions, and African American students to stop bringing the past. And while I have experienced kindness and acceptance here in the United States, many, many times I have also been reminded that I must do what I'm told. I am not white, that I must lay low and show happiness, that I must entertain or inform others with my culture, and for goodness sake, to speak in a language that we can all understand. Not just in airports or supermarkets or my workplace. I have experienced the same things here in our beloved community. I have been treated and spoken to as someone who needs an explanation because I do not know how certain things work. I am by nature slow with comebacks. So whenever these experiences happen to me, my reaction is just to tune out and mull things over and over and over. I am also blessed with bad memory. I hold very few grudges. My husband can affirm to that. It seems that I forget that these experiences don't hurt, but they do.
Lowering our defenses in service to our hearts, we can begin to understand, we can acknowledge that we human beings have gotten some fundamental organizing principles for human civilization not quite right, or perhaps just outright wrong. This is not necessarily a surprise for us Unitarian Universalists. Implicitly, explicitly, we know this, and in fact, Unitarian Universalism exists in part as a response to ideas that were broken, to ideas about what it means to be human that were broken and were not working. But what then? When the very assumptions and structures of human civilization seem to be failing to meet the best interests of our species, what some have referred to as the structures of society failing or collapsing, what can we do? What does it mean? What might it look like to be a good human being? Please welcome Cheryl Valentine into our pulpit.
Hi, everyone. The biggest change in my thinking over the course of the class comes from allowing myself to consider that Trump is not merely a lunatic, but something much more sinister. That he and the authors of Project 2025 know exactly what they are doing. They are following the authoritarian playbook step by step for how to overthrow democracy. They are spreading disinformation, politicizing independent institutions, weakening government checks and balances, scapegoating vulnerable communities like immigrants, corrupting elections and stoking violence. Everything is calculated to solidify Trump's power and enrich the pockets of the oligarchs he has chosen to rule with him. Imagine what would happen if someone with ultimate power did not have to consider the welfare of the entire human species, but only the survival and enrichment of a small percentage of humanity. First of all, the person in power might realize that the earth can no longer sustain life at the current levels of population and consumption. But rather than limit everyone's access to resources or redistribute those resources in a more fair and equitable manner, they might decide to drastically reduce the number of people competing for those resources. If the goal is to preserve resources and reduce population, then a number of Trump policies start to make more sense. If medical research is defunded, asylum seekers are refused entry, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are eliminated, warfare is encouraged, vaccines are discredited, and aid for starving children is stopped, more people will die, and there will be more resources for those who remain. One advantage of realizing that our society is in a state of collapse is that the path forward may be clearer. Instead of becoming overwhelmed by the state of worldwide conflict, greed, and injustice, I now try to follow the advice of the Dalai Lama. When facing trauma, I ask myself if there's anything I can do to change the outcome. And if the answer is no, then I let go of my worry and grief, and I focus on what I can do to make a difference. For me, the best way seems to be working in community. I try to practice kindness and compassion in my everyday encounters. We humans are all interconnected and connected to every other living being. Anytime one of us is nurtured and healed, we are all strengthened. I may not be able to change the world, but I can change my own attitude and actions. I can be on the lookout for opportunities to speak up for justice and offer encouragement to others. I realize that I do not have to have the answers or know my own purpose. I just need to be flexible and ready to use my understanding and compassion when and where they are most needed. Thank you.
Ecofeminist Joanna Macy gives us, in her words, a retelling of the Tibetan Buddhist Shambhala warrior prophecy, a prophecy that's over 1,200 years old. As she tells it, there comes a time when all life on earth is in danger. Barbarian powers have arisen. Although they waste their wealth in preparations to annihilate each other, they have much in common: weapons of unfathomable devastation and technologies that lay waste to the world. It is now, when the future of all beings hangs by the frailest of threads, that the Shambhala warriors arise. Shambhala warriors are spiritual warriors whose only weapons are compassion and insight, both of which together are critically necessary. Are we, Unitarian Universalists, warriors for the human spirit? Are we the guardians? Are we the keepers? Are we the stewards of the very best that humanity has to offer? Please welcome Holly Norton to the pulpit.
Margaret Wheatley, in her book, Who Do We Choose to Be?, from which the title of Reverend Manish's seminar is borrowed, offers a new archetype for the warrior, someone who does not do battle with weapons, but uses knowledge, skills, and empathy to help those in need. That has been perhaps the most resonant with me, as it helps me craft a plan for being of service to others as well as nurturing myself. As Wheatley states, service and empathy are the only things that will help us make our way through this mess and to a new reality. Her description of how we are in the midst of a civilization collapsing and how this is part of a cycle throughout history is strangely comforting. Her description of this as inevitable gives me hope that a new, better civilization will be created. While I consider myself a warrior in training, after being exposed to the teachings of Wheatley and the guidance of Reverend Manish, through my experience in the seminar, I realized that I have been developing warrior skills all along with my service to others, which includes serving in leadership positions for service-oriented organizations, such as the Literacy Council in the city where I live, the League of Women Voters in the county where I live, and 2 UU congregations, UUAA and the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Lima, Ohio, where I live. These are not just positions I've held and activities in which I've been involved, but also a way of looking at the world and other people, seeing the need to provide support and solace for others, and providing a safe place for them to be themselves. These skills have always been needed when people of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, people with disabilities, indigenous individuals, low-income individuals and families, women and girls, and migrants and refugees have been pushed to the margins. But now, as there are active efforts to take away the rights of these individuals have accrued and push them further to the margins, even disappear them, it is up to us to provide safe harbor, encouragement, and resources, i.e. radical welcome. Rather than hoping that the situation for them will improve, it is up to us to do what we can to improve it and use our strength to support those with fewer means of support, as well as using that strength to support each other. With our values of interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity, we UUs were made to be warriors of the human spirit, using the flaming chalice as a torch to guide ourselves and others through the darkness.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Vilma. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Holly, and all who participated in some or all of the seminar this past year. Registration is open for next year's learning opportunities. A continuation of the seminar will occur with the UU Warriors cohort and an additional offering called the Imaginarium. If you're intrigued, check them out on UUAA.org. It may be a mighty long way from where we are now to where we aspire to be, but we'll take it one step at a time and travel that journey together.